Welcome to logisticsexplained.com. Our debate today is on the shortage of HGV drivers. What are the causes and what can we do as an industry to improve it? And we're very blessed and thankful to have a great panel of guests. And I just wonder if you could quickly introduce yourselves, guys.
I'm Kevin Buchanan, Group CEO at Palex.
David Cormack, I'm Head of School at the National College for Logistics.
Hi, I'm Ben Garrett, Deputy Director of Public Affairs at Logistics UK.
I'm Debbie Boot. I'm Director of Public Affairs and Policy at the Road Haulage Association.
Jim French, Director of Road to Logistics and also chair the Trailblazer Group for Apprenticeships in Transport and Logistics.
Yeah, good. Thank you again for all your time. Really appreciate that. So we're going to do it in two sections, but the first section is to talk about the current position. So what do people think are the root causes of the HGV driver shortage? Maybe we'll start off with you, Kevin, if that's okay.
I think it's a deep and long answer, actually, because it's not one thing. I think it's a social problem here in the UK that drivers aren't seen as a skilled or important function, and that's been the case for many years. So people who went into it because maybe they had less choices, so they maybe in the military or they were in a family who had been HGV drivers, but people didn't choose to go and become an HGV driver from school. And then you had a whole period of time where government pushed kids into higher levels of education. So there are more kids getting higher and higher levels of education, and they aspire to do jobs that are seen to be more desirable than socially an HGV driver has historically been seen. It's not like that in North America. I lived in Canada for a few years, and typically an HGV driver over there is a businessman. He owns his own truck. He'll turn over $500,000 a year, and he'll go and sit at a dinner party with a lawyer and an accountant and not be thought any less of. But it's a social problem, as sort of made worse by government not appreciating how important a role it is. Never been any investment into it socially or academically. So the problem has just compounded itself as a result of globalization, because what we've been doing is topping up the need for drivers with people coming in from other countries.
And David?
I would agree with everything Kevin said, but over and above that, it's sustained pathways. What's happened over the years is there haven't been clear pathways into becoming any kind of driver, and that's that's over many years. So we're just being that compound situation where we've ended up in where we are now, and it is as bad as it's going to get, I think, at this particular moment in time.
Thank you. Ben?
Yeah, I think it's there's a lot of parallels, I think, between this and many practical, skilled roles across the economy. That just like with drivers, we're seeing an issue with an aging workforce coming up to retirement. Having pre-Logistics UK worked with in different roles, a lot of sectors that were experiencing the same thing. I think it stems from a shift from a world in which government and related bodies were doing a lot of training, and there were a lot of people. The military has been mentioned here. That's highly relevant. Coming into sectors, being skilled, trained up in them, moving much more to privatized economy, which has brought huge benefits in terms of competition and efficiency. But reflecting on what David said, never had the thinking on how do we, in that world of going from, I guess, more long-term surplus skills to efficient, lean, had the training, the sustained training pathways to kind of bridge that gap to make sure that we could have the benefits of private sector-led innovation and competition, whilst also not having a sort of hand-to-mouth approach that can come with that business will obviously to a degree focus on, so they're not carrying additional costs and they can compete with their competitors. But at the same time, that sort of we lost the working with young people, attracting them into roles piece that needed to kind of like bridge that gap.
Thank you. And David B?
Yeah, so I'll try not to repeat what other speakers have said, but I guess there are sort of two themes here, aren't there? One is the recruitment of people into the profession, but there's also the retention of drivers. So if we look at the recruitment side, the IHA did a report with Women in Transport looking at intergenerational different generations entering the workforce, so our intergenerational report. And some of the findings of that are very, very helpful, very informative. I think one of the key headlines is the way that young people think about careers nowadays is different. So rather than thinking about a single career over their working life, there is more a view that they will work in a particular industry, in a particular role for a period of time. They may retrain, they may go into a different sector. So the way that people think about work is different to what it was in the past. And I think we need to think about that as an industry, about how we recruit and how we make the industry attractive to people. On the retention side, there are some issues within the working lives of drivers that obviously we as an association campaign on. I think facilities is a big issue. I think particularly some of our members have talked about the challenges of talking to drivers and saying, look, we want you to go on this job. I don't know if you'll be able to shower at the end of the day. I don't know if you'll be able to get healthy food. I don't know the quality of facilities that you will have in your next shift. So that is challenging, and I think that certainly feeds into the retention of drivers, that we don't have enough safe, secure lorry parking, which feeds into a poor standard of a working day in many circumstances when there aren't those facilities for drivers to rest and recuperate.
Yeah, because we're actually covering that later in the debate. So you're absolutely right. And Jim?
Facilities obviously is one thing that I think distracts people away from the job. But the one thing that hasn't been mentioned, I would think, is the number of hours that people are expected to work in a driver's role. When I entered the industry, everybody works 60 hours a week. And although the pay, you could say, is comparable and maybe reasonable for the role, the average sort of hours that people are working on the Cat C plus E driver is 55 hours a week. And I think there's a lot of people that don't necessarily want to work that number of hours each week in this day and age. We've as an industry, obviously, it's very fragmented, and we touched on this. And we also touched on the fact that the margin is low, and the average margin of the top 100 is 2.1%. So therefore, obviously, the operator is trying very much to make the most use out of their resources.
Okay.
And therefore, you've got two things pulling against one another.
Okay, thank you. And obviously, the next thing we talk about is obviously the current, demographics. And I believe in the UK, because I know it changes around the world, but I think the average driver is sort of between 55 and 56. I believe that's not far wrong. And the number of females in the sector is in the low percentiles of 4 or 5%. I think that's correct. Yeah. Sorry?
2.7%.
Okay, yeah, I'm not arguing. I've heard different figures on that. So, but it's a very low percent, and lower we'd want for sure. So what are the sort of biggest challenges and opportunities facing HGV drivers as the industry develops and adapts to changing regulations?
It was interesting what Jim just said for a second, that I was listening to a guy talking yesterday, and they were saying that 41% of the UK population are presently hybrid working, Now you compare that to the hours that we're talking about as a LGV driver, and the rest of, if you're in a household and your all your all your friends are working in a hybrid way, it's going to be a very different lifestyle you're going to have, isn't it? And I think that has a bearing on age and the kind of drawing people into sector.
Yeah. And do you think the new technologies that are potentially coming on and regulations will change it for HGV drivers? Before we'll come back to how we attract them and keep them and all that stuff. But do you think there's anything that the regulations you're hearing are coming that's going to make it any worse than it is, even though it's very challenging already?
And I've heard people remark this, what I'll say next is a challenge, but I think it's resolvable, which is how can we be talking about the opportunities of autonomous vehicles, and also talking about recruiting people into driving? Don't those two things clash? And I think if you think in the way David Boot from the RHA was just talking about thinking about careers differently, then that shouldn't be as much as a challenge that it seems on the face of it. If people are looking for working in not necessarily the same role for a long period of time, but maybe similar, same industry and moving around and having a varied career, then it's important that we think about driving as a part of that, rather than having necessarily sticking to a siloed view as, well, you're our driver fleet, you're our warehouse fleet, you're our management fleet, and thinking about how career pathways can include different aspects of those, and if we do that, there is then less of a sort of bringing in technology becomes less of a challenge and potentially more of an opportunity around the opportunity to do driving differently. In the future that could be remote driving, but also to have a more interesting career pathways, and potentially career pathways that are more attractive to people when they're comparing themselves to their peers, and attractive to a broader demographic than the quite very narrow demographic that is involved in driving at the moment.
I think you're right, Ben. The answer to this is to create meaningful careers in transportation and logistics, NVQ through to degree qualifications, and have pathways that might start you at a 16-year-old, move you into a small vehicle license, move you into a larger vehicle license. You may then go on to full class 1 license, and then take a right turn and go into management or whatever. And I think modular qualifications in our sector will appeal to different people at different parts of their life. So when you're young and you're not worried about being away from home, and you're quite excited the idea of driving a big lorry, that's great. But once you start to settle down a couple of kids, your wife wants you home every night, so you can take a right turn and go into marketing, going into sales, and I think actually that's an opportunity that we have in our sector, because one of the things, and we do a lot of work going into schools at Palex to educate young people who are just about to do their options at 14, and they're amazed at the career diversity that we can offer, and that is one of the key things that we got to tackle, is awareness, and stop having logistics. I mean, most people don't know what logistics is, but even if they got some understanding, it's the wrong understanding, and we've got to polish our image so that logistics is seen as something sexy and something desirable for people to go into. Ideally, starting with the young people, because our age demographic is so high that we do have to get more youth into the system. So I do see that more as opportunity rather than anything else. And I think the technology piece will make it more attractive from young people. Lots of young people love tech, and they don't perceive that's in our sector, which our sector is very driven by it. And in terms of sorry, David.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's absolutely why the National College of Logistics was set up, so that it could create clear pathways that gave people more than just one option. So we deliver from foundation learning through to degree level, but we can create a pathway that takes you down the route of going into sales, or if you're going to go into transport or warehouse. And if we look at, I know we're coming on to government later, David, but from a government perspective, investment in training centres, so there are 10 centres of excellence for construction, creating 40,000 jobs between now and 2029. And yet we're a sector that has 2.7 million, whereas construction has 2.4. We have somewhere in the region of 175 billion turnover, and they're 145. The focus should be on creating centres of excellence that can create career pathways that are visible to schools and colleges and individuals and community, so that they see that as a proper career structure going forward. And I mean, there's a lot of changes in, as Jim will know, in the way that apprenticeships are structured, and the one that they're talking at modular and unit level now, and that will be coming through in the next year or so. Not only shorter apprenticeships, but unit-based apprenticeships and modular apprenticeships, and that's really what we need, is be able to pick and mix to create those true pathways into sector. And I think that will be a key change for both engaging early with our demographics, so that we can engage and we can start to get people excited about it. You know, you go back to the 70s, the Yorkie adverts of the 70s, you had a whole actual bow wave of people coming into sector. Now I know the adverts have been banned and there was too much masculinity in there, but actually it did change the mindset of the sector about what a driver role could be.
You just need to modernise the message, really. It's not, I mean, okay, the Yorkie thing isn't around it, but if we found that hook that was relevant in that way, like a bit like the Glasgow Smiles Better one in the 80s, that transformed Glasgow from the images of the Gorbals to a very cosmopolitan city of culture. But the good news is that we are working on something. The National Logistics College, David and his colleagues, the RHA, the Association of Pallet Networks, and we hope to bring Logistics UK to the party, are working on the Logistics Careers Partnership, which is designed to do exactly what we're talking about. Really, two things. One, how do we make ourselves better known, polish our image as a sector? And secondly, actually give really structured, modular career opportunities for people, so they can do 10 years in driving and then move into sales, or start in sales and move into driving, whatever may suit. And they connect.
Kevin, can I just stop you there? Because we'll be coming back to almost like a summary, because if not, we'll be all over the place. So we'll come back to, but you're absolutely right. And then we can talk about, in section 2 about the government policy, and we can talk about whose responsibility it is. The next thing I want to talk, because obviously time's quick on a bit, is about industry standards and working conditions. So over, since COVID, from an outside looking in, as I do in my business, you've seen that the salaries for HGV drivers have grown quite a bit, which is good and more reflective of the job. But as salaries have significantly risen, why is there still a shortage? Is it the perception, or is it the dynamics?
I think on that, it's really important to distinguish between what we mean by a shortage of what does the economy, broadly need, and especially if we as a sector are thinking about how do we support growth, and what are businesses looking for right now. So if we do the latter and think, businesses trying to recruit, do they have empty vacancies? Is that a real challenge? The data we're gathering is that that's not the case at the moment. A mixture between the economy being flat, the businesses having dealt with previous driver shortages or the ongoing driver shortage by becoming more efficient, and secondly, some restructuring in the sector. We were seeing a growing number of larger businesses and a declining number of smaller businesses. Businesses are coping at the moment. So when we talk to them, it's not, that's our membership, and it's not the whole sector, but it doesn't feel like that is an acute sort of challenge facing businesses right now. But if we look at, well, what does the sector need if the economy grows, then that picture will change. completely. So I think you just need to distinguish between those two things at the moment, and then that sort of slightly speaks to how do we go about addressing it, and where does responsibility lie, where does some collective behaviour could benefit, rather than looking at individual behaviour. Because as I say, like in terms of pay is improved. There's a lot more that can be done on conditions. Driving facilities is highly related to that. The quality of our roads is highly related to that. No one wants to just be sitting in traffic all day and hitting potholes. But it means it doesn't necessarily speak to being a pay issue now, because businesses aren't struggling right now to recruit.
I don't 100% agree with that, Ben. I think the logistics industry is a broad brush, and there are elements within it that are more suppressed than others, and it's also regionalised as well. We as an organisation, if you just take our own employed drivers, not our member network, just our own driver population, and we employ about 250-ish directly, we are always short of drivers, right? And the problem is, there is a great misunderstanding about the needs. So we had this change where people can go straight to Class 1 license, right? And that would be done in consultation through the sector's trade associations, no doubt, and the big supermarkets, right? Because they need Class 1 drivers, right? And government will hear that message louder than they will hear from the SME businesses that the likes of Logistics UK and RHA should be representing. And as a result, what we've got is an acute shortage of Class 2 drivers, right? And there's a tsunami of shortage coming, an absolute tsunami. If you look at even the government's growth predictions and the age profile, it's going to be epidemic levels, because it's one of the most difficult jobs to do, if not the most difficult job to do in the sector. You have to physically move freight around. If you're driving an HGV point to point, it's not that bad. Actually, if you depending on the route you're doing, whether you're a tramper or whether you're just doing a trunk route or set route every day, you're quite well paid. You know what you're doing. That bit, actually, you can recruit quite easily. The money's quite good now, but it's only a fragment of what's necessary.
According to the RHA's last pay report, a Cat C driver is on 38.5 grand a year. That's the national average. So I agree with Kevin, it varies quite a bit regionally, but that's based again on 49 hours. So when you look at it as a rate per hour, it's probably no more than what an average rate of pay is right across all sectors in the country. So we may have because of the shortage in 21, it may have boosted pay a little bit. It's still, in lots of respects, I might be arguing here from a union perspective, but when you think about the responsibility that the guy has got, and he's taking out over 100 grand's worth of piece of equipment or whatever, the pay, to my mind, still isn't exactly that great for what he's actually expected to do. But again, it's about competition, isn't it? We've got 66,000 operators licenses in the country, so everybody's very competitive. And I'm sure Kevin will know that the next pallet network will try and cut his rate by just £1 a pallet or whatever, and customers will transfer just for that. So drivers' wages is always very much controlled from the employer's perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think that wages is still an issue. It's better than it was, but it is definitely still an issue. But this issue of wage disparity between a Class 2 and a Class 1 has always been an issue, right? And if we've actually seen a growth in the need for the Class 2 license because of the growth in the internet sales, and so we've got a bigger need and a smaller population, and a less desirable job for a 56-year-old man or lady to be moving a pallet around on the back of a 26-tonner and coming off a tail lift. You could argue it's more skilled. So that whole piece, the latest changes to license has made words, and we as a sector should be lobbying government to have a graduated licensing That will deal with careers, and it will deal with that shortage in that area. And we've shot ourselves in the foot again, and we've got to try and get that unwound and make sure the voice of the whole sector needs help, not just the big supermarkets.
Can I just comment on
I
something you
fully
mentioned?
agree on the. Sorry.
So I was just going to comment on something you mentioned earlier, Kevin, which is around the sort of regional disparities when it comes to driver recruitment. So we're seeing 60, 70,000 new licenses each year, but there are regional issues. So in some areas, we know that there are people struggling to get the tests. So there is that regional picture to play in there. So there is that pipeline of drivers coming in. Regionally, there are issues in particular parts of the country. And then to go back to the retention issue as well, I think we also need to think about what those driving conditions are like, which is why with the RHA continue to talk about facilities, because it is something that our members talk about a lot when it comes to recruiting and retaining drivers. So I think that is still something that is at the forefront of many of our members' minds when it comes to that recruitment retention piece, which is the ability to say to their drivers that there are facilities that they can use and they're high quality, and that their driving experience across the weeks, across the months, is a positive one.
So can I just go to the next question, Jim, because it's all overlaps with that. So the next question was going to be asking, which I'll morph into two questions, morph into one. So with women only being, a low percentage, between 2 and 4% of the workforce, and very few drivers under 25, has the industry fundamentally failed to modernise its image, which we talked about earlier, which I think it may have? But also, is there an opportunity for the 40 to 55-year-old drivers that are out there to make them feel valued and trusted so they stay longer whilst we replace them?
I mean, on the image piece, I think until recent years, there has been a significant lack of investment in raising awareness of roles in the sector. People will know about the Generation Logistics campaign. I think it's just started its 4th year. That's proving very successful at creating a more positive image of logistics amongst young people. It's an awareness campaign, not a recruitment campaign, but amongst that young people, creating that positive view of logistics, but also just fundamentally increasing awareness that logistics roles exist amongst young people, and also amongst the careers advisors that they are talking to. But from the statistics we've got of the success of that campaign, it was working from a very low base. And so we need to keep going from that. It's only just the beginning, and we need to be aware that we are competing with many other sectors that are also struggling to recruit people, and we're also aware that they'll need more people as and when the economy grows. So that's definitely not a job there.
That's probably the most important thing we've said today. Is this is not just a sector problem. We have we don't have enough resource to fill the needs of all of the career requirements that the country's going to need to grow. Growth is going to be difficult because there aren't enough people, skilled or unskilled, to do all the jobs that's coming, and we are going to have to compete ferociously. And as David Cormack mentioned earlier, construction, for whatever reason, is seen as more important than transport and logistics in the government's eyes, and therefore they're already ahead of the game in terms of having these 7 centres of excellence. Our challenge is to accept that we're going to compete not with each other for that driver, but that people resource. We're going to compete with a whole range of traditional industries to try and get young people and people from other employment groups that we've not been able to do in the past, like never before. And so doing what we're doing and doing what we've done in the past will be nowhere near good enough. We're not even scratching the surface. We have a tsunami of disaster heading to the sector and the country. If we don't wake up, we're sleepwalking into a scenario that like we've never seen before. The statistics tell you that's what's going to happen. And we're disjointed and self-interested, and we're not looking at the big picture and saying, you know, actually there's a huge need here. There's a huge need here, and a huge need for lobbying government, for promoting the careers, for investment in the brand of UK logistics. And if we don't, we're in serious trouble.
Well
Just
said,
to
Kevin.
reiterate that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well
just to-
said, Kevin. And we're going to go on, if that's okay, to the sort of economic and consumer impact, but also what we're doing towards the end is, you know, say, right, what should we do? And the thing I'm picking up, who should do it? Because from an outside looking in, everyone's got great intentions and great heart and lovely people, but for whatever reason, you know, we need to sort of culminate together to have a bigger impact, to maybe get some influence in government to help you do that. But you're the experts, and we'll talk about that later. So on the you know, economic and consumer impact, two or three things that are sort of fitting together. So, and maybe we can have a chat about this, is with the potential rise of autonomous vehicles, or potential, is it ethical and right to introduce people in a young age into a career that may not finish? I don't think autonomous vehicles will come, personally, in my opinion. And also, is the next day culture and low supermarket prices a big pressure behind the drivers, driven by cost to serve and trying to get everything on the cheap?
Can I take the first one, David, if that's okay, on autonomous vehicles? I think going back to the conversation we had earlier about attraction, I think one thing I would say is people would be quite surprised by how much technology there is in the industry already. If you look at a modern cab, I was at a member's site last week who just bought a brand new cab. Very proud of it. It has a coffee machine, air fryer. You know, it's a lot different to, I guess, the standard image of what a cab is. So the technology is above where I think public perception is anyway. I think to your point about autonomous vehicles and whether we should attract people into the industry, I would say the way that people view their careers now is very different. So I think bringing somebody into our sector and say, look, this is your role, but there are so many other different roles within the sector. So rather than assuming that somebody will be a driver for their whole career, I think we need to think differently as a sector,
like a stepping stone into it. Yeah.
Well, exactly, and there are other areas to work in within logistics and to use your expertise. I think autonomy is not something that will happen in the next couple of years. It's obviously something that is happening in some countries, and we see various trials in the US and elsewhere. But it's not an immediate change to industry. So I think when that conversation happens, we can say, look, we're a vibrant sector. There's lots of technology that's being used at the moment. There's a huge potential for new technology in the future. But if you come into the industry now, that's not something that will affect your job in the next.
David, on that point, there's really two things. Firstly, if we create the career structure where people are able to do right turns into another area, it'll be easy for them to transit. And in any event, we're fixed and fascinated with this HGV point-to-point need, because that's where big business is, and that's where you hear, right? But actually, even when the technology is there, it will be 5 to 10 years before it probably hits market in a meaningful way. The final mile is still going to have to be delivered, and the technology is way nowhere near getting that final mile thing. We're talking about human robots to move a pallet around and all that other stuff that needs to be done. So actually, back to the previous points, is we're only tackling one aspect of the need, and it's the voices of the most clout that are being heard, and we're thinking about them instead of the broad brush of everything that needs to be done. What about the removals industry? They need drivers. I spent 14 years in the removal industry, highly skilled, highly sort of focused on the need for people in it, because there is no robotics that's going to teach you how to pack a box to China or export something to around the world. So you know, let's think the whole logistics industry, not one customer need who shouts at you loudly. The point-to-point thing will come, but there's still a whole load of other stuff that needs to be addressed, and will need to be.
And we're not the only sector who are going through this change. Every sector has, where AI is impacting on their roles, and there's a redesign of pathways and the way that people work. And I think we just need to be mindful of that. And I would reiterate the point that Kevin made about brand. We have to, if we're going to compete with every other sector, we really do need to focus on reinventing logistics as a sector. You know, it's a tech green sector that is going to, you know, does drive UK PLC, and we've just got to get that brand across every time we're talking. I think Generation's done amazing work on that. It's just now taking it to that next level.
Yeah, I think that point, and also the one about the removal of people back in China is really interesting, because, as you said, all sectors are going through huge change at the moment. Some sectors are very hybrid working, desk based. They'll be impacted by, and also some roles in logistics and like that, less than in other sectors, be very impacted by technology in a way that maybe they didn't anticipate being. And though, you know, there's all the development of large language models, there is a sense now that maybe that older view of the growth of technology being robots is actually more about patterns of language and desk-based work. And logistics will probably always have a mix of what is a physical industry, however it's done, the physical and the AI. That means that people will be needed in roles for as long as we can foresee. None of us can foresee what kind of roles, which goes back to that vital point about varied and interesting career pathways.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And the last question I'm going to ask to Jim on this one, actually, for a reason. I'm going to blend two questions together. So, what policies or incentives could we do to help attract more people? But behind that is, and I think this should HGV driving be treated as a high-skilled profession and seen as a high-skilled profession, similar to pilots or train drivers or other things? What's your thoughts on that, Jim?
Well, I think you'll find that if you look at it in detail, an HGV driver's more restricted in terms of hours regulations than a pilot. So it is a profession.
Of course it is, yeah.
But going back to the very first point made, that Kevin made when we started this, it isn't regarded socially as a profession within the country. We do, and just to go back to just some of the figures again, we are training, or there's over 40,000 people passing an LGV test each year, and that some of those, might be upgrades from C to C+C or something like that. But nevertheless, what is happening is probably only 50% of those people that are gaining an LGV license are actually ending up in the role as a driver within the industry. And that again is about the attractiveness of the wage levels and the facilities that are around the country. And yet the pressure that is on that role because of always having to meet times and the state of the roads and delays and God knows what. So it's not a very well thanked job either, because when the driver arrives at the distribution centre and he's half an hour late, he probably gets nothing but abuse rather than congratulating him. So in lots of ways, it's about again, it comes back to the attractiveness of the job.
So there are things we could do about that, Dave. We just don't get ourselves organised to do it. I think we could have a graduated licence scheme where drivers with experience and low accident rate ratios and a good performance could be enhanced in their status, We could have driver NVQs to as part of the career paths that we've got, so that we do create that more meaningful career status. But at the same time, I think there is also a PR job to be done. Instead of seeing them as low-level, unqualified, unskilled people, we should be presenting them as knights of the road, and get an image for them that suits and is representative of how important they are. And I think we've singularly failed to do that as an industry. We just haven't done it. It's a big task, but if we got ourselves organised, we could do the two things, and that would deal with the problem.
Thank you.
But we also need managers who've got that experience as well. So we want people to see this as part of their journey in that pathway. We want them to have time on the road driving, and then we want to see them progress into traffic ops and through to management, so that we've got people who really do understand the role. And historically, that was always part of the journey. Now I think there is more pressure to keep the drivers as drivers. What we need is a bigger pool so that we can progress the people in the right way. I think that will make a big difference.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. That's the sort of end of the first part. Thanks for all your comments, gents. It's been really interesting, and we'll go on to the next section shortly.